On April 12, 1968, deep in the mountains near Aspen, Colorado, two hikers set out for what they believed would be another routine adventure. A 23-year-old woman and her 25-year-old boyfriend had taken this 8-mile trail many times before, so neither of them expected anything unusual. They woke up around 2:30 a.m., planning to reach the summit just in time to watch the sunrise. As they parked the car at the trailhead, she noticed the moon glowing an eerie shade of red. A few days earlier, someone had mentioned a rare blood moon was coming, but she had never actually seen one until that moment. It looked fascinating, yet unsettling, hanging over the dark mountains. The trail to the summit was tough and steep, but that difficulty was part of what made them love it. Hiking through the night helped distract them from their aching feet as they talked and laughed together. She kept glancing at the red moon, asking what caused it to turn that color. But even he wasn't sure. Something about it lingered in her mind more than usual. After several exhausting hours, they reached the summit around 7:30 a.m. The air was chilly, but the day ahead promised warm weather, so they decided to spend the rest of the morning exploring the basin below. They had brought plenty of food and water, enough to stay comfortable until late afternoon. Once the sun rose fully and the cold faded, they headed down to explore areas they had never visited before. The trail was busy with hikers heading upward, but the two of them continued deeper into the quiet basin, unaware of the nightmare waiting ahead. Once they reached the basin, she suggested turning left toward an area they had never explored. She hoped they might locate an old plane crash reportedly hidden somewhere in that section. He agreed instantly, admitting he had been thinking the same thing. The crash dated back to the 1940s, and although people claimed debris still remained, few hikers ever bothered searching for it. They walked nearly 3/4 of a mile before he suddenly pointed ahead, spotting something metallic sticking out among the rocks. White fragments were scattered nearby. They hurried over and discovered a massive engine, along with larger pieces of a wing that had been too heavy for scavengers to remove over the decades. After examining the wreckage, they realized how exhausted they were from the early start and decided to rest. By the time they lay down near the crash site, it was around 10 a.m. The weather was mild, the breeze gentle, and spring had not yet brought the buzzing insects that usually spoiled naps. Without realizing it, both drifted into a deep sleep. When she opened her eyes again, sunlight covered the ground at a strange angle. She checked her watch and froze. It was already 4 p.m. Shocked, she asked how they could have slept so long. He felt the same disbelief, but hunger pushed them to eat before starting the return hike. She knew they now faced several hours walking in darkness, something she disliked far more than hiking up the mountain before dawn. Oddly, her thoughts drifted back to the blood moon, as if it had been waiting for them. After packing their things, they headed back toward the main trail, hoping they would reconnect with it before losing the last bit of daylight. But the sun was already sliding behind the distant peaks, leaving them with little time. By the time they reached the trail again, the sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountain they had climbed that morning. They had at least 3 hours of hiking ahead, but barely an hour of natural light left. Thankfully, they always carried flashlights. As they descended, it became clear they were among the last hikers still on the mountain. About an hour later, darkness began to swallow the trail, forcing them to switch on their lights. He usually walked faster and stayed ahead, so each of them used their own flashlight. They continued until they reached the top of a wide basin. Suddenly, he stopped abruptly, making her bump into him. When she asked what was wrong, he pointed toward the bottom of the basin. A faint light was moving in slow circles, looping around the same large area again and again. They watched it in confusion. Why would someone walk in a perfect circle repeatedly? Before either of them could guess, the light suddenly shut off. They stared at the empty darkness, uneasy but silent. They knew they would have to pass that exact area soon, and the trees around the basin were dense enough to make detouring impossible. As they continued, she kept her eyes fixed on the point where the light had vanished. About half an hour later, they grew close to the spot, so close that instinctively both slowed down. He whispered that they should move carefully because whoever had been there never turned the light back on. She agreed quietly, sticking close behind him. They crept forward, tense and alert, unaware that something, or someone, was already watching them from behind. Just as they moved cautiously through the darkness, a voice suddenly came from behind. "Hi, I'm Theodore. but everyone calls me Ted." The unexpected greeting made both of them jump violently. They spun around and aimed their flashlights toward the stranger standing in the middle of the trail. The man calmly told them that if they turned off their flashlights, they could see the blood moon more clearly. He insisted it would make the hike exhilarating. The suggestion alone sent a chill through her. He repeated the recommendation, smiling strangely, as if the red moon meant something important to him. Not wanting conflict, they politely declined and began slowly backing away. She noticed the man's grin, cold, unnatural, almost predatory. As soon as he disappeared from sight, they turned around and hurried down the trail, realizing they still had a long way before reaching safety. She was terrified of walking behind, so he suggested she lead while he followed closely. They entered a stretch surrounded by thick bushes, allowing them to see only a few feet ahead. Suddenly, he stopped again, whispering that he heard someone running behind them. She froze and listened, then heard it too. Fast footsteps, getting closer. He called out into the darkness, asking what the person wanted. A figure emerged, Ted, charging forward with his arms raised and a large stick in hand. Before her boyfriend could defend himself, the man struck him hard on the head, dropping him immediately. She rushed toward him, but the attacker swung again, hitting her. Blood ran down her face as she collapsed beside him. The last thing she saw was Ted leaning over her, smiling eerily, whispering about the blood moon glowing brighter without lights. Then another strike came, and everything went black. When consciousness slowly returned, she heard birds and felt cold ground beneath her. For a few peaceful seconds, she forgot everything that had happened. Then a sharp pain pulsed in her head. She touched her forehead and felt dried blood crusted across her skin and clothes. Confused, she looked around, but didn't recognize anything. Dense trees surrounded her, and the trail was nowhere in sight. Panic rushed through her as she called out repeatedly for her boyfriend, but the forest stayed silent. Fearful that the strange man might still be nearby, she forced herself to stay quiet. She tried standing, but dizziness washed over her. After a moment, she gathered herself enough to observe her surroundings again. Nothing looked familiar. She had no idea how far she'd been dragged or moved during the night. Thoughts raced through her mind. Should she wander and risk getting even more lost, or should she stay still and hope for rescue? Her father's old advice surfaced. If you're ever lost in the mountains, don't keep moving. Staying put increases your chances of being found. Remembering that, she remained exactly where she was, shivering and exhausted, but determined not to make her situation worse. Time passed slowly until she faintly heard someone calling her name. Gathering her strength, she moved toward the voices until she saw members of a search and rescue team approaching. Relief overwhelmed her as they quickly reached her and helped her down the mountain. She was taken to a hospital where doctors treated her for a head injury and concussion. Despite her injuries, her mind raced with worry for the missing man she had come with. She told rescuers everything she remembered, hoping it would help them find him before it was too late. 2 days later, search teams finally located him over a mile away in a different canyon. He had suffered multiple stab wounds and had been thrown off a cliff, but miraculously survived because a ledge about 10 feet below had broken his fall. Had he fallen any farther, he would not have lived long enough for rescuers to arrive. He was rushed to the hospital, where he spent weeks recovering from his injuries. Multiple witnesses later reported seeing a strange man at the trailhead on April 12th. They described him as oddly charming, overly friendly, and driving a tan-colored Volkswagen Beetle. Some claimed the car stayed parked there all day. Others insisted it was still there early the next morning. Despite numerous searches, neither the man nor the vehicle was ever found. Investigators believed the attacker might have been stalking hikers, using the isolated mountain trails as hunting grounds. Reports of the moving circular light matched several earlier sightings from previous years, though no one had ever connected them before. The eerie mention of the blood moon left police with even more unanswered questions. Both hikers eventually recovered from their injuries, but the memory of that night remained deeply embedded in their minds. The mountains they once loved so confidently had become a place of terror. To this day, the identity of the man known only as Ted remains a mystery, and the case is still unsolved. Rescue workers warn hikers to stay cautious in remote locations, especially when traveling at night. While most who visit the mountains return safely, some stories, like this one, serve as chilling reminders that not every danger in the wilderness comes from nature.